Well, it has been some time since I've been on here, and this is probably more of a reassuring re-entry than it is a new post. Let me talk a little bit about what I see and how I think the implications are, and why it is that I have not said much more than what I have over the last month or so. First of all, obviously, since I often delved into political commentary on our national and international scenes, my last few posts had to do with what is a PSYOP. And a PSYOP is, in fact, that things are just for appearance purposes only, and that they are there to distract us from what's really going on. And I have to tell you in all candor at the outset that what I believed then, I still believe now. There are false conflicts, there is fleeting news that disappears in a matter of days and never to reappear again, although it was the topic of the day and it took us all off whatever else might have been going on. There is this huge projection, which is a matter of, which has for 2 years been ongoing with regard to the Russia matters and the projection of the problems with uranium-1 and with Kerry taking samples to Putin, with the Clintons benefiting manifestly with 20% of our reserves being sold. And then we flip that as soon as Trump is elected, and we call it election collusion because there were a few $100,000 spent on various media and platforms that went across the spectrum and didn't necessarily do anything, but it obviously had to be Trump's problem, and all of the comings and goings in Trump Tower and all the rest of that, which ended up being a nothing burger and a few arrests for ancient matters and for systemic problems with people not answering questions to the FBI, etc. Crazy, crazy stuff. Now we've moved on to the Ukrainian thing, the pay for play, the quid pro quo, the Bidens. If anyone ever chooses to get deeper into it, they'll find out that McCain and many others were coming and going through the Ukraine. They were making deals, they were selling out, they were gaining access to the Russians and to all kinds of layers, from ISIS to Al-Qaeda to the Taliban to others, through those processes which serve to benefit the deep state at all kinds of levels, and that these guys were feeding on it, as is Joe Biden, who received payments, apparently monumental payments. Kerry's stepson. There are comments about Pelosi and Pelosi family, maybe Feinstein, maybe Adam Schiff, maybe others that are trading off on these things in exchange for giving aid, $1 billion or $1.5 billion to the Ukraine, and obviously the Biden matter, where he talks openly and brags about having forced the Ukrainians to get rid of a prosecutor who was looking into Hunter Biden and the what's the name of the company? I can't think of it right off the top of my head. And the problems that had to do with that, and Biden got his way, of course, because $1 billion was twisting in the wind. And then there's the China deal, and again, the multiple layers of collusion. This stuff goes clear back to Richard Nixon. It goes clear back to Kissinger. It certainly encompasses thousands of things that have to do with the Clintons through the 90s, where they were collaborating, Boeing with China, with providing technology, with giving defense information, with aerodynamics, with 100 other things, and of course moving hundreds and hundreds of companies to China as part of our trade. That accelerated in the early 2000s, and of course little Junior Bush looked the other way and was never smart enough to know what was going on, and so that added to it. And so over the last 50 years, the 40 years anyway, since the Nixon opening and Kissinger's attempt to play games, we have lost the core, the center, the working blue-collar, manufacturing-based, self-sustainability, high-paying jobs that the middle class had been able to rely upon since the beginning of the 1900s. So we blew away 3/4 of a century of economic growth and gave it to everybody else in trade for cheap produce, globalization, internationalization, and the destruction of the middle class in this country. And since the 1970s, since that China deal, and since the destabilization of the monetary system, the removal of the gold standard with Nixon in 73, I think it was, and all of these trade deals, including the Clintons and H.W. Bush working on NAFTA, as well as the Asian stuff, we had a middle class that went from 2/3 of the United States down to barely half or less than half. So we've lost roughly 20 or 25% of our middle class. And then, of course, in 2008, when they artificially created a recession, they took away 40% of the equity of the middle class with retirement plans, pension plans, stock investments, real estate, and land deals, and land value. And through the back door, the Federal Reserve handed 7 or 8 banks, including 3 or 4 foreign banks that have nothing to do with us, $29 trillion to buy up these assets cheap. If you follow the history of this, this is exactly what Nathan Rothschild did in 1815 when the Napoleonic War came to an end at Waterloo. They've been doing this now for 200 years, and nobody calls them on it, nobody pays attention. We've got the election dystopia, which is a totally different different issue, where Trump on one side has been promising for 3 years the 3 things that I want him to do that he has not done, and the 3 things I consider most critical to it are 4. One of them all with respect to not keeping his promises. One of them is not downscaling or ending wars. This last announcement that created huge outcries about the removal of troops from Syria ended up being 28 troops total from northern Syria, with a wink and a nod to Turkey and Erdogan to invade and take over the Kurds, the people who had been our allies through 3 or 4 conflicts and have been betrayed by H.W. Bush, by Bushy Jr., by our so-called allies and former allies, and now with Trump turning a blind eye to the Kurds and saying, well, we paid them a lot, they got a great deal, and if they can't defend themselves, oh well. Well, we have aided them in being at risk, and we have aided them at not being at benefit through all of these things. And of course, they are perhaps the largest Middle East group of ethnic separate groups that does not have a homeland of any kind. I think there are 40 million of them in eastern Syria, southeastern Turkey, and northern Iraq, and that's been true since the Second World War. We have ignored them now for 70-odd years. We have the the wall issue, which the GOP never promoted during the 2 years that they had the presidency, the House of Representatives, and Senate. Did they ever push anything through? Did they ever try to force anything through? You know, there have been friends of mine who said, well, Trump never had the Republicans. He had McCain and Flake and, you know, a dozen other fake Republicans, but you have to put the fire to them and see what they do. And we never put the fire to them. The president did not force it. The president has not talked about it, but has never treated it as a national security issue. And the president, who ordered the Pentagon to do it, and to do some of it through financing, and the Pentagon disdained and stood down and refused to follow through. We still get reports that they're building the wall, and yes, they're building little 10 and 20 mile strips of the wall, mostly replacing pedestrian barriers that are 2 or 3 feet tall that you could walk over with real fence. But all of the barbed wire fences, the open fence, the hundreds of miles that are either easily or freely accessible throughout the entire border have nothing done to them, and that has remained true throughout it. And of course, then we've got the caravans. I think Trump did an excellent job of finally, after 800,000 people or so came in, forcing Mexico to hold those caravans at bay. I think there are some recent reports that that there are caravans that are now reapproaching here. And through this, on the other hand, the absolute craziness of this is that we have Democrats, all but one of them, that are for war. The so-called protest party, the party of 1968 that took the Democrats out of it and allowed Nixon to win, because there were so many of us, boomers and the like, who saw the war for what it was and did not want any more of it. So here we have, and it is obvious that this is all a facade. It is a psyop. When the so-called Democrats, who have always been more conservative about war, even though they got us into most of the wars that we've had in the last 100 years, who always served as the protest party for the so-called pro-war, pro-military, pro-expansionist Republicans, are doing none of the above and are squealing the loudest at Trump for even tepidly backing off from war. There's only one, and that's Tulsi Gabbard, that actually has guts enough to speak up against the war, and she is the one best qualified to do so because she has worn a military uniform. You may or may not like anything else that she stands for, but at least she stands for one thing, and whether she would do anything with her connections to the CFR and for others after she were elected, is a totally different issue. And whether the destruction of the many things that she has to hang on to as a Democrat would help is a different issue. One of my subscribers talked to me today and exchanged with me today the fact that they may actually end up this confab between Clinton and Tulsi Gabbard may be more of a facade and show to polarize and push Gabbard off into a third party, or to be a separate candidate in the general election, which would feed enough of the electoral votes perhaps away from Trump, or to triangulate the Democratic candidate with Tulsi and Trump, and come up with a less than majority elected president, as we did with Bill Clinton in 92, right? In addition to that, the Democrats, who always supposedly looked after the little guy, the middle class, the poor, the working poor, they failed to do anything about going after these global multinational corporations. They've done nothing about the working poor. They've done nothing about the dilution of value of these minimum wages that working people have. The hourly workers are worse and worse off, and that we see that throughout the middle class. We see that in the failure of good jobs for millennials and for the generations thereafter. We see that with the massive debts. Nobody has come up with a working plan for the student loans, the $1.5 trillion of student loans that have destroyed the millennials and that needs to be fixed. Giving them a holiday, wiping it out may or may not be working, but having some kind of a write-down program for bankruptcy or bankruptcy reorganization makes a great deal of sense, because it puts a third of the millennials back into the economy in this country. We've got illegals that are being given benefits and values, including people going after the HUD secretary to continue to provide subsidized housing for people who are illegal, and for demanding that they not be given a 6-month notice to get out of the subsidized housing for which they do not statutorily qualify. The Democrats are crazy in those issues. We have lost ownership. We have downgraded jobs. We have offshore manufacturing. We're now threatening to include a universal medical insurance for everybody, and many of the Democrats have seen the only easy, cheap option is to just wash it in with Medicare, which would thereby destroy Medicare for anybody over 65 or so years of age. It is absolute craziness. So always there is this drumbeat, and this is among my own subscribers and among people that follow and share with me and people that I've watched. Many of them are now saying, it's just a matter of days before something happens, whether it's Q or Trump or whatever. We've got 100,000 indictments. We have all kinds of arrests that are going to be done. I keep hearing people saying that Barr and Horowitz are going to do something. That's absolute nonsense. William Barr has been dark and dirty since he was born. His dad was part of the OSS. They've been at this forever. The father apparently helped hire Epstein when Epstein was a young teacher, and a young and unqualified math and physics teacher, and nothing is going to come of it. The failure of Barr to do anything about the Epstein stuff, to go after Ghislaine Maxwell or Ghislaine or whatever her name is, the failure to go after the pilots, the butlers, the chauffeurs, the handlers, the other facilitators for the hundreds of girls that have been trafficked, the failure to adequately preserve the evidence that has to do with Epstein that could have taken down hundreds of big players is all been disappeared and gone. It is a total failure of our government to go after the elites. We have a two-tiered system in this country, and our justice system is not a justice system. I am ashamed of our justice system. I am ashamed of the legal profession. I am ashamed of the politicians. I am ashamed of our populace that does nothing about it. What have we done about Assange? What have we done about any of the rest of this? Who knows? Let me add to this, and this is an aside that has been crazy for me. So 600,000 homes get shut down from power in California on the preemptive potentiality that there might be high winds. Did we ever do that when there are hurricanes in Florida or off the East Coast? Did we do it when there were hurricanes in Texas? Did we shut everybody down throughout the Houston area and for 50 miles out? Did we knock down millions of home owners from having electricity because the wind might blow? And where are you, Californians? Where are you in going to Sacramento and demanding that PG&E never do this again, and that they fully justify it, and that it be fully investigated, and that the people that represent you in California demand that this not happen ever again, and that the infrastructure be fixed, and that the return on investment for those things not come out of the pocket of the working people who are paying for the utilities, but rather from the return on investment of the Rothschilds and others that own PG&E. Let's get on with it, folks. This is a total dystopian situation, and it was a test and gameplay to see how easily they could get away with shutting down power to millions of people. They got away with it. Where are those 30,000, 50,000 people on the lawns in the capital of Sacramento demanding that this end? Somebody has to come forward. We are so much worse than lemmings and lambs. They would be ashamed to associate with us. We are pathetic, and we do nothing. So enough of that. Enough of me talking about that. So what have I been doing? I've saved this the last, so if you want to get off here, you're perfectly well to do that. So I'm raising a grandkid. I'm doing it alone. I've been doing it now for 8 or 9 years. He is a year or two from graduating. And I will be ready before I reach 75 to actually quit raising a child. Isn't that funny? I've been finishing the touches on our home to make it ready for sale. I've been planning to move and to build, and what I have been researching and studying in part, among many other things, is some kind of barn dominium, which if you don't know what it is, take a look. There's Texas barn dominiums. There's a couple other Texas builders. They're private parties that do it on YouTube. They basically take steel shops and sheds, well-built steel shops and sheds, and convert them into living units inside. I think it's a great idea. And to mix it with the Earthship home, which is Michael Reynolds and Taos, New Mexico, and the rest of that, making it south-facing, making it passive, making it solar, making it have amenities for a greenhouse and the rest of that, be self-sustaining, rainwater, recycling, and using used materials. I'm not packing any tires. I'm sorry. I'm not doing a sledgehammer with 1,000 tires at 300 pounds of dirt apiece, nor do I think that that's a good structural format for construction. And then the third thing I tossed into it, which Mike Reynolds and the rest of the Earthship guys are not doing adequately, in my opinion, is to make it a functional greenhouse that actually provides food. And I think the best source for that is aquaponics, which puts a pond and a greenhouse in. And I'm looking at having something like 1,000 or 1,500 square feet of greenhouse on the south side of this barn dominium, quasi-Earthship, quasi-aquaponics greenhouse, to see if I can incorporate them. So I've been researching all of this stuff for weeks, looking at BTUs and passive solar and airflow and water heating and solar panels and the size of the units and a variety of other things. And then I'm learning, of course, about Arizona building and construction laws, and Arizona, frankly, is not up to speed, and they do not do a good job, and they have not done a good job for 50 years. What else is new? I'm looking at building suppliers in the county and working with neighbors on a possible building site. The county has been great. The neighbors have been great. The building suppliers, as I will share with you, have done crazy stuff, which has to do with my attempted to buy or get lined out to buy a metal building. And it's a substantial metal building, probably close to 4,000 square feet, that would serve as shop, art studio, wood shop, garage, living quarters, and this massive greenhouse, right? And I dealt with a national related building and contracting outfit building outfit that provides these steel buildings. I have to tell you that the agreement that they sent me with DocuSign is one of the most pathetic situations I have ever been in, and I told them I absolutely refuse to sign anything like that. On the face of it, it is a very, very one-sided agreement. It's so much worse than a one-sided agreement, there's nothing to it. And secondly, it did not provide any of the details that I would have to have had to sign an agreement, and they wanted me to sign first and then work on the details and the amenities and the additions and the windows and doors and eaves and color and the rest of that. And then they say, well, we've got this 50-year warranty, but it doesn't cover anything except basically paint. And that's only if you adequately take care of it. It's just crazy stuff. And it's much worse than that. If there's anybody that wants me to give what amounts to a legal run-through, one of these DocuSign crazy national-oriented agreements, I would be happy to do it, because I think I could add value to what you might do there. I've been researching and looking at megaliths and megalithic structure and pre-Diluvian architecture, which goes clear back to 12,005 years ago. It goes back to before Noah's Ark and the deluge. I used to think that was hocus pocus, or it was a little pond flood. I think now it was an international flood, and I have my own ideas about how it happened. I have read the 5 best books on what caused the deluge and how it worked and why it worked the way it did. And I also believe, and some of you are going to think I'm totally crazy, that there was a very well-developed culture in this world prior to 12,500 years ago. That was in some ways vastly more adept than we are today. Including perhaps Atlantis. I looked at ancient Hebrew history. I've looked at the Old Testament, the Genesis and the rest of it. I've looked at the Sumerian tablets and the Akkadian records, the Babylonian records going back thousands of years. Places like Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, Egypt, Indonesia, China, the mounds, the Stonehenge and the rest of that, the Bulgarian pyramid, and throughout Aztec, Mayan, and Peruvian megaliths, and have some thoughts and ideas about what's going on there and what it obviously evidences, which is totally against our archaeological idiot PhDs that are trying to tell us what history really was. They're totally wrong, like everything else. I've also been on my own, working on my own spiritual journey and dealing with metaphysics and quantum mechanics and how to attach some of that together. And you guys are going to think I'm a little touched, right? But our universe, the holographic potential nature of it, parallel universes, out-of-body travel, remote viewing, and some other stuff that I'm working on with that. And I'm working on it. I actually am. And in the meantime, I had I had sinus surgery this last couple of weeks. And this is the fourth time I've had sinus surgery for polyps and growths and allergies and restricted use of my entire sinus passageway and breathing. And the guy was surprised to find out, this ear, nose, and throat guy was surprised to find out when he started digging around that I had an egg-sized growth in my right nose, closed clear back into a sinus, called a sphenoethmoidal mucopyoseal. And I could have gone blind and lots of other crazy stuff. And of course, I was not breathing well. And some of you commented that I looked bad and sounded wheezy, and I did. So if anybody's interested in the building agreement stuff, I would be happy to go through that. I have 20 ideas about it. I also have some ideas about buying real estate and how to do that, about the whole DocuSign process. I think I could be of some value there. I can talk to you about what happens in the county. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for being patient. I don't know whether any of you are left to watch this or not, but if you like it, give a thumbs up and tell me what you want me to talk about. You know, I don't think at this point, given that nobody seems to be doing anything toward changing our international political situation, I don't think anything I say is going to make much of a difference, except just to go hoo-hoo, here we are. But all these other issues are in play, and I would be happy to talk about them if anybody feels that would be of value. Thanks so much for watching. There you have it. And give a thumbs up if you like it. Join if you like. Tell me what you want. Leave comments. I always read every comment. I try to give response to many of them. And feel free to get a hold of me at Dr. Phrog, DrPhrog, at seethingfrog.com. And let me know what you think. Thanks so much. And goodness to all of you.